Canada made one move, and the United States felt the pressure almost right away. A key Canadian product became impossible to ignore, leaving American farmers worried about higher costs. Canada showed just how important it is, and what happened next proved that even the United States could not simply look the other way. A 25% tariff on most Canadian imports took effect, and American farm organizations issued warnings within hours. The tariff applied to Canadian potash, one of the 3 essential macronutrients that modern agricultural fertilizer delivers to soil. Within days, Republican lawmakers from farm states were lobbying the administration for exemptions. Within a week, an executive order reduced the non-CUSMA compliant potash tariff from 25% to 10%. The speed of that reversal is the clearest possible evidence of what the original 25% rate would have done to American agricultural input costs. And the 10% that remained, combined with the existing tariff structure, still represents a documented cost increase that American farmers are absorbing on every ton of Canadian potash they purchase. The 36% price increase referenced in the title reflects the compounding effect of the tariff structure on potash prices across the full import cost chain. RBC Economics calculated that a 25% tariff on Canadian potash would add approximately $50 to $75 per ton to input costs for American farmers at the point of full cost pass-through. At Saskatchewan, mine gate prices that were running approximately 440 to 460 Canadian dollars per ton in late 2024 and early 2025, a combined tariff burden, including the 10% IEEPA rate plus any residual duty on CUSMA, non-compliant goods, translates into an effective cost increase approaching 36% compared to the pre-tariff. Baseline: when potash crossed the border at most favored nation rates under the original CUSMA framework. The fertilizer price data confirms the directional impact. The U.S. import price index for chemical fertilizers rose from 164.5 in December 2024 to 186.5 in September 2025, a 13.4% increase across the index in 9 months. That was not driven by global supply shortages. The structural dependence that makes those cost increases impossible for American farmers to avoid is documented in production and trade statistics that have not changed materially in decades. The United States produces approximately 400,000 metric tons of potash domestically per year. U.S. domestic consumption is approximately 5.3 million metric tons annually. That is a self-sufficiency ratio of roughly 7.5%. Canada supplies approximately 85% of U.S. potash imports. Saskatchewan alone accounted for over 32% of global potash production in 2023. Canada's scale of potash mining by production volume is 36 times larger than the United States. The mathematical reality of those figures is that no tariff schedule can convert American domestic production into a meaningful substitute for Canadian supply on any timeline that matters to a farmer making fertilizer purchasing decisions before the spring planting season. The alternative global suppliers that trade policy advocates sometimes reference as potential replacements for Canadian supply fail on practical grounds that go beyond unit economics. Russia is one of the world's largest potash producers. But Western sanctions frameworks and shipping logistics for Russian potash reaching American Midwest farms are not comparable to Saskatchewan potash moving by CN or CP rail directly to blending facilities in Illinois or Iowa. Belarus, whose state-owned Belaruskali company is one of the world's 3 largest potash producers, operates under its own sanctions restrictions, following the Lukashenko government's crackdown on political opposition in 2020. Israel's Dead Sea Works produces potash, but at volumes that cannot replace Canadian supply at continental scale. The Fertilizer Institute, which represents American fertilizer producers, distributors, and retailers, noted explicitly that potash deposits are geographically specific and that mine development in the United States is time-intensive and costly. A polite way of saying that a new American potash mine cannot be permitted, financed, built, and brought to production in time for the next planting cycle, or the one after that. The Associated Press's March 2025 reporting on farm sector responses to the tariffs captured the specific financial pressure American farmers faced entering the 2025 planting season. Many growers were already managing compressed margins driven by corn prices that had declined significantly from their 2022 post-Ukraine war peaks, without a corresponding reduction in input cost levels that had risen sharply in 2022 and 2023 and never fully retreated. Fertilizer accounts for between 30 and 45% of annual operating costs for American row crop farmers, depending on the crop type. For corn specifically, USDA data shows fertilizer has represented 33 to 44% of production costs since 2020. A 10 to 36% increase in that input category does not have a simple offset available to farmers whose revenue is determined by commodity prices they do not control. Reuters reported in March 2025 that farm groups warned of higher costs and fewer markets following the tariff announcements, a dual pressure that the agricultural sector has not faced simultaneously in the modern trade dispute era. The fewer markets dimension refers to retaliatory measures from Canada and other trading partners that affected American agricultural exports. Canadian counter tariffs targeted soybean products, agricultural equipment, and other American farm goods as part of the retaliatory package Ottawa assembled in response to Trump's Section 232 and IEEPA tariffs. American farmers were simultaneously paying more for Canadian fertilizer inputs and facing reduced access to Canadian market demand for their own products. Politico reported in March 2025 that the Trump administration was considering agricultural exemptions under pressure from farm state Republican lawmakers, senators, and representatives from Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, and other corn and soybean belt states whose constituents were among the most directly exposed to potash cost increases. The potash exemption that materialized reducing the IEPA rate from 25% to 10% through an executive order was described by the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association as a positive first step, a phrase that explicitly acknowledges the remaining 10% was still a cost increase rather than a resolution. The Reuters October 2024 reporting on global potash market conditions provides the supply context within which the tariff dispute landed. Potash supply was nearing pre-war levels as producers were cutting output to manage oversupply, meaning global potash prices were under downward pressure heading into 2025 from market fundamentals alone, before American tariffs introduced upward cost pressure through the import duty channel. The simultaneous presence of global supply softness and American tariff cost increases created a split market. Global benchmark prices were declining while American import costs were rising, creating a widening divergence between what American buyers paid and what buyers in other countries paid for the same Canadian potash produced in the same Saskatchewan mines. The problem is, if we start to upset Canada, where else around the world do you start to go? Said Josh Linville, Vice President of Fertilizer at StoneX. Our second biggest supplier, that's Russia. The BHP Jansen mine in Saskatchewan, expected to add approximately 4.35 million tons of annual potash production capacity when it reaches full operation, will not reduce American import dependence on Canada. It will expand it, adding new Canadian supply. At the same time, American domestic production remains structurally incapable of scaling to meet national demand. Every additional ton of potash the Jansen mine produces is a ton that can be exported, and the United States is the largest single destination for Canadian potash exports by geography and existing logistics infrastructure.